Welcome to another episode of the Autism Empowered podcast. If your child struggles with speech, motor skills, or processing the world around them, the root issue may not be behavior at all. It could be the myelin, the insulation that lets brain cells fire, connect, and wire properly. We're talking about the wiring of the brain here, and that's where today's guest comes in. About the wiring of the brain, not just behaviors, not just surface level symptoms, but the actual myelin, which is the insulation that allows neurons to fire faster, connect better, and power development in autism. And joining me today is someone who has spent over 3 decades uncovering the science behind it. Dr. Dayan Goodenowe is a neuroscientist, researcher, and founder of Prodrome Sciences. He has a PhD in psychiatry and neurochemistry. He's authored groundbreaking research on Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, cancer, and autism. And he pioneered the development of Plasmalogen precursors, which are molecules designed to restore one of the most important building blocks in our brains. Here's why this matters. Plasmalogens are not something you can just eat or get from food. They're the matrix of the cell membranes, the essential phospholipids that keep neurons strong, flexible, and able to connect. Without enough plasmalogens, the brain wiring slows down, and we see it come up as problem behaviors and autism, speech delay, hypersensitivities, etc. Dr. Goodenowe created a way to give the body the raw material it needs to restore these levels of plasmalogens, helping improve brain function, connection, and development. This could change how you understand autism and what you can do to help your child. So please help me welcome Dr. Goodenowe to Autism Empowered. How are you today?
Very good. Thank you, Batool. Pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you so much for making this time. This is a very important conversation. And I want to dive straight into something you once said that really made me pause and think. You've said autism is fundamentally a disease of white matter. And I would love to learn more about that theory of yours.
Yeah, so really it's inflammation. And so first of all, you think about autism, it's not a disease. It's a neurodevelopmental disorder. Okay, what happens is, and we think about all of us as we develop, learning how to use a fork and learning how to identify a cat from a dog and how to tease our sister, like all these things that we learn going up. And it's kind of a pathway, like it's a developmental path. And that developmental process handles with white matter. So what happens in autism is that normal development gets disrupted. It can either get delayed or it can get diverted, adaptation. So it's kind of like riding a bike. Like you have neurodevelopment has a momentum to it. Like it doesn't just stop and go and stop and go. It's moving. And then the brain gets inflamed and the child gets kind of diverted from that normal developmental path. And then the child needs to kind of adapt to it, say, okay, how do I deal with the situation? So if you think about even before we had advanced technologies like our blood work or MRI, one of the simplest ways of diagnosing autism was head circumference. Okay, children with autism will often have an increased head circumference, which means brain swelling. Well, that swelling is in the white matter. Okay, so the inflammation in the brain creates water and it is swelling, just no different than getting a pimple basically on your arm, but it's inside your head and it creates a swelling of the brain. And so this white matter is how we learn. Okay, so when you're born, you don't know what a fork is, you don't know anything. But your body has the brain kind of network is there. All these wires were laid down mostly in your third trimester, and you get a certain basic neurological connections occurring. And then you're put into this world, and then everyone has to go through this process of connecting the dots. Okay, we put these little motions and we peekaboo and all these things. So we learn these things, and as we learn them, the brain says, "Oh, I got something." Okay, there's a connection between A and B, and when that connection occurs, there's electrical signal that happens, and then there's cells in your body or brain called oligodendrocytes that wrap that neuron. It says, "Okay, here's something. I want to keep that." Okay, so you have a lot of extra neurons. So then the myelination process is white matter is how we fundamentally learn. So white matter development is neurodevelopment, basically. And so that's so fundamentally a white matter disease. And so then fast forward to get more and more advanced technology like MRI, highly reproducible observations that the brain white matter in autism is disrupted. Okay. Whether you're an adult or a child, there is, and it's a, it's not, it's kind of confusing because, you're going to get hypersensitivities and hyposensitivities and there's adaptation, but fundamentally there's a dilution of the white matter. The white matter is less dense in autism. And
Heard you say this, that there is a disruption of that connection. And I've also heard you say that, you know, with children on the autism spectrum, we're not born with it. This is something that they develop later on. Are these exposure to toxins? If this is not genetic, I know there is a genetic component to it, but that's going into the rare genetic conditions. And we know that if the number is 1 in 30 to even less now, 1 in 30 children are getting diagnosed with autism, this is not just genetic. What is it, in your opinion?
it gets controversial for people because they kind of want to blame something, right? And this thing when I often get people say my child was born with autism. Well, it's not possible. Okay, and with all due respect, because autism means that the child has missed a certain developmental milestone. Okay, now there might be risk factors. Yes, there are genetic risk factors. Okay, premature birth, there's malnutrition, there is many issues. And even the quality of breastfeeding during the first 6 months has an association with autism rates. But these associations aren't 100% causal. Okay, so yes, I can say clearly, unambiguously, children that are exclusively breastfed for the first 6 months of life have lower rates of autism. Does that mean that every child that is breastfed will never ever get autism? No. It just means less children that are breastfed get autism. So you still can get autism even though you've done everything right as a mom, right? You were healthy, you ate well, you breastfed, okay, and still something can happen, right? So people need to understand there's risk factors for disease, and then there's triggers that can overcome those. So you do have some genetic risk factors. I mean, there's good ones like, methyltransferase issues, any kind of, mitochondrial defects, and they could be minor ones, and they could just be kind of waiting or kind of under the surface. And then you get a triggering event. Okay. You get an adverse exposure to things you may or may not even know you were exposed to. Okay. We talk about the glyphosate. We talk about certain other pesticides and herbicides that are in our environment. It could be a vaccine. It could be an infection from a flu. It could be a head injury. Okay. Or it could be or just a normal thing happened. And then the child had an exaggerated reaction to it. Right. And most parents with children with autism, they can kind of find a point in time that, they developed normally and then something happened. Okay. And they weren't quite the same after this event. Okay. They can't always put their finger exactly on that point. Okay. But typically there was a change. Okay. And normally when we say from a clinical perspective, it's hard to diagnose autism before 12 months. People kind of think they can try a little bit, but it's really, really hard. Okay. So it's really around that 18-month period, kind of the earliest that you can really say, yeah, something's not quite right. Because children develop at normal, like every child will have, like some kids will walk in, at a younger age. And so we all know, and we don't want to, overanalyze every single
And
child,
overdiagnose, yeah,
right?
which is another issue. Yeah.
You want to give every child the chance to kind of catch up and develop in their own pathway. So these are all these things. So I tell people anything that can trigger inflammation in the brain can cause autism. It doesn't matter. And I think that's why when we're trying to pinpoint one single agent, it's not going to be one single agent. Okay. And it could be a slightly different thing for a different child. But the fundamental thing, what is common about everything that causes, whether it's a trace, heavy metal contamination, whatever it is, it creates an inflammation of the brain. That part we know is absolute. There is no autism without
Without
brain.
neuroinflammation.
So the question is where something caused, and you can have gut dysbiosis. There's a bunch of other things, right? But ultimately, something has ended up with inflammation of the brain, and then the brain can't actually resolve it. And that inflammation now is creating a distraction. It's creating a load. It's disturbing the brain, and saying, it's got to do two jobs. It's trying to do regular neurodevelopment, and it's trying to fight this inflammation at the same time. And then the brain has to figure out, okay, what am I going to do and what am I not going to do? And that's fundamentally what you see. And then you see these very reproducible patterns in autism.
And an inflamed brain I've heard you explain this in your lectures and webinars that the myelination process will be impaired and it will break down. What is the importance of the myelination process when it comes down to autism and development, speech and hypersensitivities, and so on and so forth?
Yeah. So inflammation creates a drag and a drain. Okay. The brain is in the middle, in the first few years of life, there's a massive amount of myelination. Like you start with like 7% of your brain roughly has myelin when you're born. And but you and I will have like 50% of our brain is myelinated. Okay. It's a huge difference, right? And about 30, 40% of that happens in the first 3 years of life. So it's a really heavy load that the brain's got a job to do during that early stages of development. Imagine yourself, you're trying to train for a marathon and you get the flu, right? So you can't train for the marathon and have a flu at the same time. And so you're saying, okay, so you're going to basically say something's going to give. I can't build muscle and get endurance if I'm sick with the flu, right? So fundamentally, the brain, it's got a job to do. It's like you're trying to train for a marathon. Well, it's training to myelinate. It's training to develop all these neurons and develop all those things. And then you're giving the brain the flu at the same time as it's trying to do its job. And it can't actually do its job because it's being distracted. And I think people, we get overcomplicated in all of the nuances, but really that's fundamentally it. So what the inflammation is doing in the brain, it's creating a metabolic load. Okay. The brain has to be doing two things at once and it just can't keep up. And the myelination process gets delayed.
Yeah. And would you say that that turns up as neuroinflammation, and hence it can be different things, right? There's autism, there's global developmental delay, there's ADHD, there's speech delay, OCD, anxiety, and we're seeing more and more of these conditions pop up in children. But since it's all related to brain and the myelination process, I'd just like to say different monsters, but same problem.
And then the severity can be different, right? And so that's why we have the difference between boys and girls. Like there's 3 times more boys than
Yeah.
girls
Yeah.
because girls are got extra protection of their brain. Like they have beta estradiol and boys don't have, and it's a very powerful neuroprotective. So the insult, the inflammation, or the environmental pressure on girls and boys is the same,
Hmm.
but girls have higher levels of resilience than boys. So it's not that boys get more autism than girls. It's girls get less. So they're being protected by it, which also means when a girl gets autism, that means the environmental stress had to be much higher. It takes a lot more to give a girl autism than does to give a boy autism, which means when you have girls with autism, their outcomes are more worse. And they manifest slightly differently because they're girls, right? And boys and girls are different. So they have different, socialization, and they have different ways of handling things. So their outbursts are going to be slightly different. Obviously, be similar, but that's kind of why the epidemiological outcomes in girls is more severe than the than in boys. So yeah,
Yeah.
so that's kind of where it goes.
Let's discuss the hypersensitivities in autism. Like, I know neuroinflammation is, when we discuss it in the autism community, the hypersensitivities, the sleep regression, the tics, the stims, um, and even the light and sound sensitivities. Most parents would say, oh, my child does have sensitivities to the light and sound, but might be completely okay with loud TV noise. So it's like, yeah, you have them in certain areas, but you don't have them in other areas. And it's not always consistent. How does neuroinflammation work? It cannot be selective. So what's going on in the back?
Well, it's going to be, and it can be regional, like certain parts of your brain might get more sensitive to other areas of the brain. But these hypersensitivities is from the inflammation. It's just like having a pimple. It hurts and you touch it and you go, oh crap, that's, you know, and then if you want to deal with it, you can pinch yourself somewhere else, distract yourself from the pimple. And so a lot of the stimming, a lot of the things that the stereotypical behavior that they do is a distraction. Okay. They have a means of actually distracting themselves from the hypersensitivities. It's like some people can study at school. They put loud music on, so the loud music drowns out. They can have they have control over some level of stimulation, and that control allows them to manage other areas. But the hypersensitivity comes from this impaired myelination. Okay, so the myelination is what gives you the tuning of your signals. When the myelination is thin, small signals get amplified, and it's the inability to filter content that's coming into you. Okay, and so this is why. So autism is really, people think it's a disease of emotion or outward emotion, but it's not. I use the word disease. I shouldn't use it, a disorder. Okay, so I apologize if I slip up and call it word a disease every now and then. And so don't hate me for doing that. Just that happens by so it's a disorder where it's not about their ability to emote, okay, which is what they can treat people like action figures, right? They can say, I want to do something, I can do it. The issue is the receiving. The receiving comes in way like a fire hose to them, and they can't filter out the reception. Okay, and a good example for people to think about is if you ever try to learn a second language later on in life, right? Okay, and so you go through books and you learn how to say where's the toilet and where's this and where's that, right? So you can think of a phrase and then you can say the phrase and think, ha, I can speak this language. But then you get stuck in an airport with people speaking naturally, and you're going, oh my god, I don't understand this language at all, because this natural language is coming in at you, is bombarding you, and what you thought you knew you don't know anymore. And this is what autism is like. Okay, so they can think of a sentence, if you will, or a movement, and they can emote that movement, but when they can't, the receiving part is overwhelming to them. And so since they can't receive properly, they're overwhelmed by the reception. Okay, they can't feel emotion properly. They can't titrate. So they say, okay, I want to get a hug from my mom. Okay, so if I do this, what do I get? And so we don't learn by doing, we learn by receiving. Okay, so if I say something and I watch your face and do you get a happy response or I get a negative response? Well, I have to interpret your facial expression, and I say, okay, well then I'm going to change. Then I'm going to change the next sentence to see how you react to this sentence. And so if I want to tease my sister and make her upset, I'm going to do a certain set of things, okay, on purpose. And if I want to, do something else and get a hug from my mom, I'm going to do something else. But I have to actually be able to interpret that signal coming into me and then change my behavior and then watch back and forth. And that's that back and forth process. And so when we call autism, like the autistic part of autism, which is internally to themselves, is they remove that external uncontrolled environment, which is that other person or the environment around them. So now they can control their own thoughts because now they're communicating with themselves,
Yeah.
right? Like it's not me versus my sister, it's me versus me. So I'm playing chess and I'm on both sides of I'm playing both black and white at the same time. And so when their brain starts calming down, they start having fun with the world. The world becomes fun now for them because now they can actually play in the world. They can actually do something and they can interpret the response. And now they go, oh, and now the world no longer becomes so scary to them. It becomes fun for them. And so you start seeing these children come and these adults coming out of their shells. And that's where, their sense of humor comes in and they start to tease. They start to have, and it's not because what's happening is that once you can interpret the signals coming into them, that becomes fun for them. Okay? It becomes, oh, I actually have control. The world around me isn't quite as scary anymore. I can actually, I'm not just a victim of my environment anymore. I'm actually an active participant in my environment. And that's the myelination process, because as we myelinate, we get more and more precise behavior. They can think of a baby, the first born can barely hold a fork, okay? And eventually they can play the piano. And you can think of the fine tuning that occurs and how the fine motor and all that is an individual neuron, individual axon, being able to very highly precisely move, okay? And that doesn't happen instantly. That happens through training. Well, the same thing happens with noise. Okay. And so you walk into a ballroom for a wedding reception, for example, and there might be 10 conversations going on. And you can kind of tune into one conversation over the other. You can say, okay, I can kind of listen to this conversation and tune out the rest. Well, that's the myelination, being able to precisely deal with that. See, an autistic person walks in a room, they hear all the sounds at the same time. They can't differentiate this. And so it's no longer interesting anymore. Like, it's no fun to be in a room where you're just getting bombarded with 1,000 voices and you can't tell where the sounds are coming from, who's talking at this point in time. And so the myelination gives us precision of the stimulation in our environment. And the more precise we are, the more fine-tuned we can be in our thoughts and our processes. And so the hypersensitivity comes in is when one person in a room of 100 starts talking, it sounds like 100 people are talking. And so that's what they're feeling. They're feeling that high, and then that's why they want to filter the noise. They want to,
Processing.
yeah,
It's
and
it's
they want to
interesting
distract themselves.
that you say that because and we'll get into your products in a bit, but since the time I've started using it, and I've been getting different reports from, the after school care, the teachers, the therapists, and it's all about that now we're getting more nuanced with our, the way we're interacting with people, especially the part where you said sense of humor. That struck a chord with me because isn't that something that's higher level thinking for our children? Any parent who's hearing me right now knows exactly what I mean when I say that, because we're all waiting for them to pass a joke or get a joke or, show that personality, assert themselves a certain way. We don't want just problem behaviors. We want personality. We want opinions. And what you're saying is that that is linked to the myelination process in the brain.
Yeah. And so, because they can start interacting and they can start interpreting these things and they can start thinking these things through. My nephew, for example, okay, so he's a pretty big guy. He's got Bryson, he's got autism. And my brother is about my size, maybe a couple inches smaller than I am. But Bryson is a big kid. Like he's an adult. I think he's in his 20s now. And so he's like 6 inches taller than my brother. But his mom is really short. Okay. And so whenever they're in a room, his mom, Beth, will say, well, he gets his height from my side of the family. So yeah, I know I'm short, but my brothers are really big. And then Bryson goes, Mom, you always say that every time we're in a conversation, right? So she's teasing him. And so but he's now interacting and he's having fun just being part of the conversation. And another boy, Trey, he used to always have headphones in all the time because he couldn't filter the noise out because he just always has headphones. And you'd have to always really take him, tell him to take his headphones out. His parents would always be, and now he doesn't put his headphones in because he likes to listen to the conversation. So
It doesn't bother him or trigger him the way it used to anymore.
No, and he's enjoying it now. So he's actually part of the conversation. And again, he starts joking around. And so it's kind of because I think humor that's one of the simplest ways of really interacting with our peers. It just kind of, it's releasing, it's fun, it's role playing, it's kind of it's safe role playing. And it's interesting. I see that. And my head of manufacturing, he has a boy with autism as well. And same thing with him. He likes to start joking with people and
Yeah.
it's fun. You see them just kind of starting to, they're starting to play again. They're starting to figure out this world around them.
Yeah, and I'm a little bit biased. I do believe in therapies, definitely occupational therapy and different types of therapies as needed for the child, but we can't teach a child to joke. These are interpretations that they will have from the way they perceive the world and engage with the world. So I'm going to ask you to share with us what is myelination? Like, I know that a lot of parents tuning in won't have the medical background, so maybe explain it using your analogy that you do. But exactly what is myelination, so that we understand it?
So it's a coating on our axons. Okay, so our people think of the brain as a computer, but it's really not. It's like a wiring diagram. So you think about your wall. Okay, you have a light switch by the door, and it connects to a wire that goes all the way to your light bulb, and then you turn the light switch on, and the electricity goes through the wall and lights on the light bulb. So you don't want the wall to go on fire, so it's protected. So there's a protective coating around the wire that allows the electrical signal to go from the light switch to the light bulb. And so now if that coating is disrupted, say a mouse gets in your walls and chews a bit of it, and so you can so sometimes you can get, if you have bad wiring, you'll get flickering, like the light will flicker. You'll get, the signal won't be strong, or it'll be dim light versus a bright light. Okay. So the myelination is that plastic coating that allows for a nice clean signal to go from A to B. Okay. And it also allows us, the strength of the signal can get stronger. Okay, so it's like if you have a thin coating on that wire, you can only allow a very small signal. But if you have thick coating, you can get a very strong signal. So the myelination is like the tuning fork. It allows that clean signal to go from point A to point B, and not disrupt all the other wires around it, because you're dealing with a bundle of millions of wires all
Yep.
stacked together, and the myelin separates each of these wires from each other so that one wire is going and it's not affecting the wire next to it, just the way the wiring harness of your car would work. And so when that wiring gets thin or it gets damaged, it short circuits. Okay, the signal in one wire will cross over to another wire, and then all of a sudden you get this noisiness. So like a static, it's like static. So I tell the people, you can think of your brain with like the two old dials of a radio station. You have the tuning dial and the volume dial. And if you ever been driving along and you're not tuned into the station quite well, if you keep the volume low, you can kind of hear the music behind the static. There's static, but you can kind of hear the music. But if you crank the volume up when you're not tuned into the right station, all you hear is a bunch of crackling sound. And that's autism. And so when you, and the myelination. So when you get the myelination back, the signal comes in clear. And once the signal comes in clear, you can crank up the volume. Okay. And then you can, and that's what's going on. So what's happening for autism is that this inflammation causes this disruption in the myelination. It makes the signal pathways just either weak or intermittent, and so they try to tamp things down so that they can still get signal above that noise. And then once the myelination process is completed, then you can crank up the volume. So then the neurodevelopment, so that's the part. So part of it is to clean up, restore the myelination so that the normal rate of neurodevelopment can start back up again. And then we can start to stimulate it and push it farther and faster with a higher volume. And that's what the omega-3s help
Yeah,
stimulate.
and that was going to be my next question. So now that we've established that autism is very deeply linked to the impaired myelination process, and that leads to neuroinflammation in the body and in the system, causing all kinds of disruptions for the children, how do we go about repairing it?
Yeah, so if you can think of a bad myelination or disrupted myelination, you're riding a bike, okay, and the bike is just wobbly, okay, it's wobbling, so you can't drive very, you can't pedal very fast because it's wobbling. And so if you impair the myelination, the bike can go straight, but it could be slowed down already. So the myelination process and the developmental process has been kind of slowed because they've intentionally kind of slowed themselves down because of that. Well, you don't immediately get back up on track again. So when you restore the myelination, you're kind of restoring the homeostasis or baseline again. But now you got to remember, children with autism and adults with autism, even if you fix the neural inflammation, they still have the injury that they've suffered.
And they have
Okay,
to pick up, yeah.
it's like you break your leg. I can fix your leg, but you still got to recover from the broken leg. Just because I put your leg together doesn't mean that you're running a marathon the next day. So same thing here with the inflammation. So the inflammation has actually caused some damage or some delay. So then we have to accelerate the neurodevelopmental process. We need to kind of push, give that bicycle a push to get back up to the regular speed, if you will. And that is the neurogenesis part, and trying to accelerate that. That's where the omega-3s come in. And I've always been very resistant about those in the past. And it's been the parents of the autistic families that have told me, no, like the omega-3 makes a big difference. But you want to do, and that kind of helps push them back on, and you get an accelerated recovery path. But you want to use that after you get the inflammation under control.
Okay. What are your views about the omega-3 while we're on the subject? Because I know that your products are, well, you have both. I think you have omega-9 and omega-3 in different products. One is Glia and the other one is the Neuro Oil. Yeah, and maybe you can also segue
So,
into how we use those.
so technically speaking, children with autism are not omega-3 deficient. In fact, they actually have higher levels of DHA than non-autistic children. And the reason for that is part of this inflammation, getting into the details, causes mitochondrial stress. So the inflammation causes mitochondrial stress. So if there is an underlying mitochondrial weakness, inflammation will affect a child with a mitochondrial issue more than one who does not. And same thing with the methyltransferase system. If someone has a methyltransferase issue, the inflammation will have a greater impact on that individual. So having said that, so you have these two organelles in your cells, the mitochondria and the peroxisome. And the peroxisome is where you make your omega-3 DHA. So when the mitochondria is overwhelmed, you actually get overactive peroxisomes in some situations. That's why I don't recommend omega-3 like as a fish oil or an algae oil by itself in autism. It does have anti-inflammatory effects, but that's actually, it's also stimulating. So omega-9 is really where the issue is. So the omega-9 supplements are important at the beginning of the autism, developmental process. And then omega-3 is stimulating back. And so it's anti-inflammatory, but it's also quite stimulating. So the omega-9s are the first part. But then when you want to stimulate nerve growth. So from we're talking now we're getting into autism happens early in life, but what about people with Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and concussion? So these are issues where there's been a shrinkage of the brain, where the neurodevelopment. So in Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, for example, the nerve fibers have kind of shrunken back, and you have to kind of regrow them. Like you don't have to create brand new nerve cells, but the what's called the dendritic tree or the neurites. Okay, those grow, those go up and down. So every time you learn, okay, so if you learn a new recipe, for example, right? Well, you will have made new neurites for that recipe. Okay, your brain is very dynamic. It's growing and shrinking all the time. So people shouldn't think the brain is some fixed entity. Every time you learn something, there's neurite growth. In neurodegenerative diseases of elderly, those are things that we have to restart and we need to called neurogenesis. Well, we can use those same kind of concepts in autism for the recovery phase and the catching up phase. So the first phase is remove the drag, remove the inflammation load, and then the endogenous underlying, and we're going to help the endogenous underlying myelination process with the omega-9 plasmalogens. So now you've kind of gotten to baseline. But now baseline is not enough because I'm already 2 miles behind on the marathon. So I got to catch up to everybody who's 2 miles ahead of me. And so the next phase is how do I accelerate neurological development? And so that and what's nice about children is that there's a pretty decent window of time that we can do this. And so that's where the omega-3s come in, and specifically the omega-3 plasmalogens. They stimulate neurite growth. And this is what we're seeing with parents is that the omega-9, the glia at beginning, really reduces their aggression, their sleep improvement, gut improvement. They start being more attentive and interactive. And so all these adverse behavioral challenges, those are dealt with fundamentally with reducing the inflammation and improving the myelination. But accelerating their school performance or their neuromuscular performance, that comes with the omega-3s.
Ah,
And so they
makes
say,
sense.
and then there's a little bit of a balancing act, right? So because it's stimulating. So you're saying, okay, I don't want to create more autism symptoms, right? Because I'm
Yeah.
actually,
You
you know,
don't want the child stimming more than they already
if,
are.
if
I
you're
get it.
if you're on the spectrum and an adult, right, and you take the neuro, you feel it. It feels like, oh my God, I'm
Charged.
I'm charged. Peel me off the wall. Okay, I'm ready. And whereas the glia is calming. Well, it's like most people say it's like putting reading glasses on their brain, and so they can read a sentence now without skipping 5 times and that kind of stuff. So they feel the
That's
omega
true.
9 kind of focuses them, and the omega-3 enhances them. So when you and I or whatever takes, like if you take a bunch of the neuro, like the lights get brighter and it's quite cognitively enhancing because it's stimulating neurological synapse formation, and that's what stimulates the neurite growth. So once you've calmed the brain down, and this is again what we learn by just doing, right? We learn by just
You
talking to
learned
each
it by
other
experiencing it.
and sharing our experiences and sharing the best way for all of us because every family is going to be slightly different. And this came from not me, it came from the family saying, okay, and they just said, well, we're going to try this neuro. Okay. And so sometimes they get a little, once they calmed down, they add the neuro, they really see big differences. Like their play changes, their interactions change, their cognitive function gets better, their neuromuscular function, their control.
More energy as well, because a lot of our kids have mitochondrial dysfunction and fatigue. So I'm going to summarize this quickly for families listening in. Autism is linked to an impaired myelination process, and what you are presenting, Dr. Dayan, is a plasmalogen therapy, really, which is what your products are about, and they're a combination of omega-3 and omega. And you're not actually, I think I heard you say in one of your lectures as well that these aren't giving the body plasmalogens; these are precursors to the
Yeah.
plasmalogen. Yeah.
So the oligodendrocyte is a cell that makes your myelin. And one of the major building blocks of myelin is plasmalogens and the omega-9 specifically. That's why it's in breast milk. So human breast milk contains specifically omega-9 plasmalogen precursors, which is why human breastfeeding, it's not found in cow's milk. It's just basically in human milk. And so that's why it improves the myelination process. So what you're doing is you're providing those oligodendrocytes ready-made material. Like the oligodendrocyte is your carpenter trying to make a house, and you're saying, here's some plywood, make a house. Okay. Don't go in the forest and make your own wood. We're just going to give you some plywood, make a house. And so we're physically handing ready-made material to the oligodendrocyte to make the myelin. So it reduces that load. So the inflammation load that is causing that's creating an issue, we're manually providing material for those cells. And it also reduces the inflammation because it gets rid of all the oxidative stress and a whole bunch of other issues with it. But fundamentally, it's this plasmalogen precursor that makes up like 80% of your myelin, 70, like it's a very high percentage. It's the rate limiting step. And, if you see my lectures, I go through it in more detail, but so it's not just omega-9 and omega-3, it's this plasmalogen backbone. And the critical component is, like you said, is precursors, because we need to get things into the human brain. And precursors go into the brain, whereas the fully formed plasmalogens in your diet or in your blood don't. So in order to get it into the brain, we need to provide a precursor that goes through the blood-brain barrier and goes into those cells and allow that cell to make the final plasmalogen that goes into the myelin. And that's kind of how the science of it all works.
Would you say that this can also help with the co-occurring conditions that sometimes autism comes with, like the PANS and PANDAS and, tics and motor dysfunction?
Yeah, so when you're talking about, mold or Lyme and, the bacterial infections with PANS and PANDAS, for example, right? Those are really what happens with those situations is they're very acute inflammatory events. Okay, they're very severe, which is why the reactions to the child can be dramatic. Like they're just, and their brain's just on fire, and they just want to go. They just want to put their head someplace to get it out, and so then they burst out in on these ways they're quite damaging. So obviously, there's issues of the detox process or the antibacterial process for those situations that definitely need to be dealt with and looked into. But independent of that, just helping the brain, straight up saying, I can reduce the inflammation of the brain and I can restore that myelination process. That's going to help. And so in PANS and PANDAS, we see quite dramatic, like on-off activities, right? It's not a cure-all. Like you still need to deal with all your other good stuff, right? And same thing with your gut microbiome, and there's some probiotics that really work well, and other nutrition, like we talk about carnitine, N-acetylcysteine, your CoQ10s. Like there's other good nutrition, but getting good protein and fat in their diets, like phosphatidylcholine, egg yolk products, or that's what we recommend. But getting right fat in their diet. So there's still proper nutrition, which also is a challenge, right? Because they have these food sensitivities, and you're living in a stressful household, and you're just trying to get your kids to school, what fight am I going to, what war am I going to win today? And okay, which you got to pick your battles, so to speak, right? There's like the real life
You're telling me the
of living,
scenario that goes down in my house.
right? Right. And so how do we find simpler solutions? So, get some good whey protein and get some good, like human breast milk is 80% whey, 20% casein. And so we're still got, basic nutrition
Yeah.
that can make a big impact on people.
So some of your products, or well, actually, there's one of your products has PC in it as well. So the phosphatidylcholine, and I know you stress a lot on that being the egg yolk. It's actually made of the egg yolk oil. Can you touch a little bit on that? And this is not going to be the same as parents running into the kitchen and beating up eggs and just separating the yolks.
Well, but that's still good for you too, right? So don't stop eating eggs. Like that's one of that's or other fatty meat products, like even like liver and stuff like that. So phosphatidylcholine is a critical component of health. Okay, and choline deficiencies are a big deal in pregnancy and in children. Okay, so this is where if people are vegetarians or strict vegans, you got to be very, very careful. It's very easy to become choline deficient, and that is very unhealthy for your liver. Virtually choline deficiencies are one of the only deficiencies that can reproducibly create cancer. Without fail, you can create liver and pancreatic issues by just providing a choline deficient diet. So choline is important. Now, the quality of the choline is also important. And so the animal basic, so people talk about plant-based phosphocholine, like you get like a soy-based or sunflower oil-based, but those structure aren't the same as what the human brain and body use. When we're trying to find a proper source to get into the human brain, again, we need to get things into the brain so that helps the brain. The brain is like a castle surrounded by a moat, and if you can't get across the moat, you can't you can't get in there. So phosphatidylcholine. So we got these PC plus products. So what we do is we take egg yolk powder, okay, desiccated, fresh, and we extract it with ethanol. So there's no egg protein. We just get the fat out of egg yolks. And that contains the phosphocholine, triglycerides, all the fat-based nutrition that's in an egg yolk. And that gets a nice concentrated form. And then we mix it. We add some other things in it with some vitamin E and some CoQ10, some vitamin D, K2.
D3 and K2 as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
And then the plasmalogens. And so you get this nice potent lipid formulation that when you take it orally, it gets into your blood supply and it delivers nutrition directly to your muscles and your brain. And that's and it's really powerful stuff, especially like, when you're talking about multiple sclerosis and Parkinson's, like these things really, the PC plus products make a big difference. And but they are more potent. So you want to so typically you start with just pure glia. You can try the glia PC, which has a PC, and add some of that in there. Okay. And everyone should just go with, start low and go slow type of thing. Just keep step up, step by step. But it's very powerful stuff. And especially for our kids with neurological diseases, those, we're dealing really, like if we're talking about leukodystrophies or really, really life-threatening or terminal demyelination diseases, then we step it up a bit more.
Yeah, and I want to emphasize that the work that you're doing is so valuable because you're breaking down those barriers at the moment. You are addressing the neurologically linked conditions like even Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, and you're bringing results in those areas. And you're running a research facility which is doing case studies on children on the autism spectrum, and you're seeing great results. And I've been following your journey and your podcasts and your webinars, and the proof is in the pudding, quite literally, and you're actually showing us that work. And I've personally used the Glia oil, and I can't wait to get started on Glia plus PC. Now I feel like we're ready for it, but I would say it is bringing in those gains that you were talking about, which I don't think I fully understood until I actually used the product, and now that makes sense because you see the difference, you see that change in the myelination process. A good question, which I bet families will ask: do they need to rule out food sensitivities to egg yolks and things like that before they use your products?
Well, you should double check. Go slow. It shouldn't have the food sensitivity issues because all the protein is being removed and it's sterilized basically. But you can be sensitive to anything in this world. Okay, so but typically try it at low doses and go from there. My recommendation on that
And
perspective.
how young can you start them on it? Is there an age
Anytime.
limit? Any?
Well, prenatal. So
Wow.
so I treat women. I've treated children with mitochondrial defects in utero and have them born normally. And so we can treat children in utero through the mom. And so I think because the myelination begins in third trimester. So realistically speaking, if you're a mom, you should be on the glia. Okay. It improves your breast milk production. It improves the sleep and the child himself. Like we have a number of mothers that are on plasmalogens. I actually have one parent that was on plasmalogens and didn't even know it, but her child was born with Down syndrome. And the child is actually developing dramatically well, even though it has Down syndrome, latching on, no congenital heart defects. They thought it was a mosaic. And so an important thing for people to realize is that we're not playing God here. Okay, we're not coming in with a drug and saying I can manipulate the human body better than it was ever made in the first place. No, we're saying, look, the body's designed to work. The oligodendrocyte has a job to do. It wants to do its job. Okay, it doesn't want to do anything else. It has one job to do, is to myelinate. Can I help it do its job? Okay, and the neuron what is it? What can I do to help? Is the mindset that we have is what can I do to help? Okay, what are you trying? If you think of a cell in your body and you say, what are you trying to do? Your heart cell, your lung cell, your brain cell. Like, what are you trying to do? Okay. So once I know what you're trying to do, I say, well, can I help you do that? Let's not worry about why you're having a problem. Okay. I don't have to worry about the genetic defect and this, like we can bypass them. And the more severe ones, we can go really bypass it. But the developing brain wants to develop. It's trying to do a job. It's trying to learn. It's trying to get myelination. It's trying to do these things, right? And so the question is, can I help you do this? And can we do it biochemically? Because we're a biochemical organism. And so can we strategically provide these molecules? And the reason why it's not mainstream yet is that you're not one molecule, right? You're not and you're not a bowl of soup. So I can quickly string off a whole bunch of lists of things from your thiamine and your riboflavin and your niacin. Like, so there's there's a soup. There's a lot of things that go into a recipe. It's like a if you like cooking, okay, a good recipe usually has lots of ingredients. And same thing. And so when we're trying to restore the functionality of the system, it's ridiculous to think that I can give you one thing, like leucovorin, for example. Okay, methylfolate, absolutely a good thing. Okay, I'm not saying don't take it. Take it. It helps support the methyltransferase system, and especially if you have an MTHFR mutation, it's going to be helpful. Okay. But do you think that's going to be a cure-all? No, because that's not the only thing happening. Okay. Or carnitine has been useful. Okay. And it improves fatty acid metabolism. It improves outcome. It reduces inflammation. Absolutely important. And acetylcysteine. Yes. You know what? It improves your glutathione levels. Okay. And we do these clinical trials and studies of one molecule at a time. But to think that you're going to create one drug or one molecule, okay, that's going to be this cure-all for all things. Okay, that is extreme arrogance, okay, from a scientific perspective. Okay, the body isn't built that way. Now, these plasmalogen precursors that we have, they're one thing, but they work in combination with other things. But they do seem to have a critical component of myelination. And it falls into that category of choline. Okay, choline is a big deal, like the phosphatidylcholine system. Okay, if you're deficient, if you eat a choline deficient diet, you will die. Steve Jobs died because of his diet, and anyone who has pancreatic cancer basically had a choline deficiency. Okay,
Wow.
full stop. Okay, and so there's certain nutrition of your body that is really, really hard to get environmentally or for your body to make, because your body can make choline, but it can only make it so, it's not like we have to get choline from our diet. Your body can make some, but it's very energetically demanding to make it. So we need some from our diet. Plasmalogens are like that. Okay. Your body makes plasmalogens. Okay. And most of us, we make enough of them for most of our lives. Okay. But under certain circumstances, we can't make enough. If you have myocarditis, like the heart inflammation that we're dealing with out there, right? The 50% of the membrane of your heart is plasmalogen, and it uses this to resolve inflammation. And so if you get depleted of these molecules because of inflammation, okay, your body is under a heavy load to catch up. And so the reason why the plasmalogens seem to have this disproportionate effect is because, first of all, in the myelin, like 60, 70, like it's a huge percentage of the myelin. So it just makes mathematical sense at that point in time. Like we're not dealing with a trace level molecule here. We're dealing with pounds of this stuff in your body, right? So that's kind of where we're at. So even though it is quite powerful, and quite often it's because shocking, sometimes just glee alone really
Yeah.
just snaps kids out of this thing, right? And that's because everything else is going well. Right. And it's that one thing that's missing. So if someone's B12 deficient, you ever met someone that has a B12 deficiency and you give them B12, their life changes. Right. Now, if you're not B12 deficient, it doesn't, it
Doesn't do much. Yeah.
doesn't do much. Right. Same thing with, thyroids or something like that. So plasmalogens are one of those core nutritional components that for some strange reason is only available in breast milk, and because your body basically makes enough of it normally. So that's kind of why it adds to this
Yeah. And what
neuroinflammation.
I love about your products is that you're giving the body the ability to repair itself. This isn't like, let's just take some vitamin C, let's top up the vitamin D. You're actually giving the body the raw material that it needs to do its job properly, which is, we know that our kids have that issue. They're unable to do that. So supporting that, it's more restorative, it's more balancing, and I love that there's a need for more of that, more services like that, more products like that that can do that in the community. So with that, Dr. Dan, I wanted to thank you. This has been extremely enlightening for the audience that's going to tune in and listen to you. I've kept you as a surprise guest, so they're all going to be delighted to hear about this. I have been getting a lot of questions about the myelination and my theories about it. I'm like, well, you know what? Let me bring the expert so he can explain it to us in a way we can all understand. And I also wanted to thank you for the valuable work you're doing in the community, because as an autism parent, I will say that as a parent, there's so much that is unknown, and not enough people are backing that up with science and research the way you are. And you're convincing us and showing us through evidence. I just wanted to thank you for that. That's huge.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to do MRI in autistic children because you got to sedate them. So we do a lot of the validation in adults. Like, myelination is a big issue with multiple sclerosis and other diseases. So we know unambiguously that we can restore myelination in adults. So this mechanistically is working, and symptomatically we're seeing in children. And we'll start doing some MRI studies as well. But the MRI studies in autism are quite robust already in the academic facilities. So yes, it's all, I think most of the stuff is understandable. I think the jargon, scientists don't always explain it in simple, straightforward terms. Like, you don't need to become a neuroscientist to understand basic stuff that has to happen. But yeah, I really love this. Love working with the families, getting in the community, and then just learning from each other. And that's the biggest thing, because as a community, each family has slightly different challenges, right? And they'll have, some will, even just the recipes, how to put certain things into food and things like those it's these practical things that make the difference between failure and success. It's because you still have everyday life that you have to contend with. So
Yep. All right, guys, before we wrap up, I wanted to share something really special with you guys. If you'd like to explore glia oil for your child or yourself, this is the Plasmalogen precursor we talked about today that supports brain wiring and connection. You can get 25% off with my code Autism Empowered. I'll leave the link and code in the description below so you guys can check it out. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Dayan. It's been an absolute pleasure. And you know that I will bring you back again to talk about other things. Anyone who comes to my podcast knows that they're going to be a repeat guest at some point in the future. So thank you so much for your time.
you're very welcome. Thank you, Batool.